All right, Don, welcome to the podcast. So good to have you.
It's so great to be here. Great to see you again.
So as I know, great to see you too. So as I mentioned in our intro, I was telling the folks that we have a long and sordid history. No, I followed Dr. Don.
Well, that's going to keep their interest.
I followed Dr. Don's research way back in the day. We both share a love for the study of trauma and how it affects the brain. Some of the things that some of my tribe may or may not know, but I did a couple dissertations as I was studying the brain science of success. The obvious antithesis of that is the brain science of failure, and trauma comes up as a medium or a reason over and over and over again. And so seeing what I saw in Uganda with trauma and the brain with AIDS orphans, it became really apparent to me that, and in my own life, that trauma really does have an impact in the way we process information. And then here you show up on Shannon Sumner's stage, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, I know him. Like, I felt like I'd read so much of your stuff, and you did a thing with us there, and then again in James Wedmore's mastermind. So I'm super honored to have you on the podcast. I cannot wait for my listeners to get a dose of the magic that is Dr. Don Wood.
Oh, thank you so much.
So can you just dive in literally from the top? Like, what got you going in the study around the brain science and trauma and how it affects the way we perform? He is very much a high performance mentor to some of the best in the business out there, athletes, high performers, and then some people that are really struggling. So you really hit all areas of the scale. So what got you going in this obsession around figuring out how to overcome trauma?
Well, it really came from my own personal experience. I talk about my family life when I grew up was idyllic. I didn't know it was idyllic. I was growing up thinking that everybody lived the life I did. I had the most nurturing, loving, caring parents. My brother and sister and I can't even remember them raising their voice or arguing. Yeah. And so that was pretty unique. Yeah. And so, and I had friends that I hung out with, but you never saw all the dysfunction in their homes. So I just assumed that everybody was living that same kind of life that I was. Yeah. And then when I met my wife, I realized very quickly that she was not living in that kind of a home. So, and that was sort of a surprise to me. And I was thinking, well, this is pretty rare. What I didn't realize is that was the norm. So she was living with a very dysfunctional father who created a lot of trauma for her, and ever since she was a little girl. So she was constantly living in fear. Yeah. And so the way her mind was responding was anytime I would say something like, no, I don't like that, she could respond back with, why are you mad at me?
Right. And
then I would go like, where did you get I was mad at you from that statement?
Right.
And she said, well, it sounded like you were getting mad at me. And so what I had realized is that as a child, she had been learning to listen so carefully to the way her father spoke so that she could recognize when danger was coming. And so that was constantly filtering through that. And so then when my daughter was, so I kept thinking, when we get married, because we got married really young. I met her when I was 18. We got married at 19. Because I had a chance to play professional hockey in Sweden. And so when I thought, okay, now that she's going to be married to me, this will all calm down.
Right.
And it didn't calm down. And so I was very careful the way I spoke. I tried to be much more patient with the way I said things. And I could still get her crying. And this was really, really having an effect on me because I kept on thinking, wow, like, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
And, and then I'd get to a point where I'd say, listen, I'm not a robot. I can't speak like a robot.
Yeah.
And, so it was causing a lot of frustration on her part, on my part. And I couldn't understand why she wasn't feeling safe. She couldn't understand why I couldn't understand what she was experiencing. Mm. And so then when my daughter was 14, she was diagnosed with Crohn's. And so when we heard about, what she was dealing with, she had 4 resections done. My wife did tremendous research about Crohn's, and it was like, well, take out dairy, take out gluten, all these different things. And I finally got down to a point where my wife just had exhausted everything that she could do. And she said, well, you were adopted, which I was. My sister and I were adopted. My brother's the natural. She says, this must be coming from your side. So this is now up to you to figure it out. And so I started researching it. And what I realized is the common denominator between my wife and my daughter was trauma. And we didn't know that my daughter had experienced trauma when she was between 6 and 8, sexual abuse by a girl in the neighborhood. So that was like devastating to us because we thought we had protected her, and yet this was still going on for her. And so that's really what led it, is trying to figure out answers for my own family, and including my youngest son who had 3 head injuries. So we started looking, they just kept telling us he had major depression. And I said, no, he's got traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
But I could not get them to believe me. They just were like, no, this is major depression. So just looking for answers for my own family is really where it all started.
Wow. And so what were some of the findings that you started to uncover as you dove in trying to get the answers to these questions?
Really, the big thing is that unresolved trauma, when I mean unresolved, if the person is still, what I say is, if you think about something that happened to you 5 years ago or 10 years ago and you have an emotion, that means it's active. Your mind is actually trying to get you to do something. So the purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So if you think about something that happened to you 5 years ago and you feel fear, it's an error message. Your mind's trying to get you to run, do something, escape. And so that was what my wife was doing all the time. I never understood it. She would always be saying things like, don't you wish we never did that? Or don't you wish this had happened instead of that? Her mind was trying to rewrite history. That was the way she was coping. So she was trying to create scenarios that would be better because her mind, that would bring her some peace. If she was thinking, would it be better if this had happened or better if that had happened? So what I really realized is that the mind is continually filtering through these experiences to respond to what's happening now. And so in my research, I found some things called the time slice theory. That was where everybody thinks that consciousness is streaming.
Right, like continual, right?
Continual, right? But it's not. So the subconscious is streaming.
Right.
But the conscious mind is only getting time slices or pieces of that information, right?
Yep.
And there's a 400 millionth of a second gap in between the subconscious and conscious mind seeing the same thing.
Yes.
And when I read that research, I said, well, this makes sense. Because what I said is happening in the 400 millionth of a second is the subconscious mind is doing a Google search.
Right.
What does this look like, sound like, smell like, right? And then starts going into memory, starts pulling up information from memory. And because your subconscious operates in the present, right? It's always present in the moment.
Always.
It's looking at old information in real time.
Yeah.
And then it creates a physiological response to protect you. So all of a sudden, this made sense why my wife, when I would say, no, I don't like this, right? I used to think she was responding to me.
Yeah.
She wasn't responding to me. She was responding to all that data about being in danger.
Wow.
And that's why her nervous system would be overregulated, overstimulated. It's a flood of information coming into the nervous system, so it can't stop the reaction. It's too powerful.
And then it's triggering the fight or flight system in the now based on what had happened in the past. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. So the person consciously is saying, I'm feeling these emotions and feelings. They have no idea why.
Yeah.
It's not because of what's happening now necessarily. It's actually coming from an over response to all the stuff that happened. So, for example, I worked with Rebecca Gregory, who was one of the Boston Marathon bombing survivors. And she said, when she sat down, as she started talking to me, she started to shake and cry. And I said, Rebecca, do you know why you're shaking and crying right now? She said, well, because of what happened to me. And I said, correct. But your mind also thinks there's a bomb about to go off.
Right.
Because it's looking, in order to tell me what happened, she has to go into memory. It starts pulling up all this information and it's starting a response because it thinks your subconscious doesn't know if it's now or 5 years from now, right? Or 5 years earlier. Everything is happening now. And so then obviously her mind was then feeling tremendous fear, trying to protect her about something that's not happening. It's an error message.
I would love for you to continue to share that story, because I can tell you, when I heard the story of how she went back and all of the things that you kind of walked her through, and the shift and the change that has happening generationally probably now in her family, it really is powerful. And I mean, she's a Boston marathoner. She's like us. She's a high performer. She's out there doing the thing. She's working on adrenaline, and this happens. And what was going on that she came to you? First of all, I mean, we would think it's obvious, but what was her reason for wanting to do the work with you?
Well, she actually wasn't running that day. She was actually a spectator.
Right.
And so she was sitting with her 5-year-old son watching, and she was 3 feet from the first bomb. So those bombers put a backpack right behind her. So when the bomb went off, she took most of the blast and saved her son.
Yeah.
But she ended up losing her left leg.
Wow.
So the people who make all the prosthetics keep sending us people, because obviously they've been traumatized.
Yeah, obviously.
Right? And so when Rebecca and her new husband, they weren't married at the time, when they heard about it, I happened to be at the place that makes the prosthetics that day. And so Stan, who runs it, says, you need to talk to Dr. Wood and let him explain to you what he's doing. And so we sat down. She says, oh, well, shit, I've tried everything. She says, she speaks. Now, she was a very high performer. She wrote a book. She spoke all around the country. Yeah. And yet she said every time she'd finish one of her speeches, she was so exhausted and worn out and overwhelmed that she'd have to just crash, for the rest of the day at the hotel.
Wow.
And so she said, I can't believe that, she said, it sounds too good to be true that you in 4 hours can actually help me fix this. And so, but that's exactly what she experienced. We got her mind to reset. Because when we have trauma, we store trauma differently. All your senses are heightened: sight, smell, right? Hearing. Yeah. So it's recording it in what I call high definition. And so when the mind sees that brightness and intensity to it, when it's actually going through its Google search, it looks so powerful that it responds. So what I usually ask them is, I'll say, well, can you remember what you ate for dinner last night? And people will give me, I ate, steak, whatever it was. I'll say, well, that was stored as a low resolution file, not a lot of detail. But when we're in a threatening situation, we bring in even more detail.
Oh, yeah.
And so because of that, right, the key to it is we're going to get your mind to reset that information into the same format as what you ate for dinner last night. And then it stops calling for the action because there's no intensity to it. It's just information.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that if your mind thought there was a threat, that it has to respond. It's not choosing, right? It's an automatic, it's an autonomic nervous system response. It's going to do it. Mm-hmm. Not choosing, you're just doing it.
Right, right. And we talk about all the time how, from my research and my vantage point, the subconscious controls 80 to 90% of your daily actions and decisions. This is exactly what Dr. Woods is talking about. You can't choose that response. It is going to automatically be the filter in which you see your current circumstances. And what I love that you picture that you painted, especially with your wife and you, so thank you for being so vulnerable, is you're sitting there just giving information, and she doesn't even realize she's receiving it as a threat, but her whole body is receiving it as a threat. Her eyes are probably dilating. She's doing all of those physiological changes as if it's going through the trauma originally in a microsecond, in a nanosecond, right? And so she doesn't even realize it. You don't realize it as you're going through. What are some of the signs that you've seen in people that maybe have a trauma that they haven't processed, and they're unaware that it's running a script that's keeping them in that place?
Yeah, great question. So, well, first of all, a lot of people who have autoimmune issues, they've got unresolved trauma. If you have inflammation, that inflammation is the response to trauma.
Yeah.
So if the trauma keeps looping, your mind keeps using that information as a resource to protect you. That's what happened to my wife. She burnt out her thyroid because she has Hashimoto's. Her cortisol levels were constantly going off. And it's an emergency management system, but for my wife, it was an operating system. And so if you get in your car to drive downtown and you say, well, I only want to drive 30 miles an hour, but I'm going to put my foot all the way down on the gas as far as I can, but I'll use the brakes to keep me going 30. You're going to stress out the system.
Yeah.
It's not designed to do that.
Gotta wear
right?
the brakes out.
And the brakes are a temporary solution to stop the car, right? It's not meant to be running on that.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I always say, and this is a great way to measure it, if you think about something that happened to you at any point in your life and you feel an emotion, it's active.
Mm-hmm.
That's the simplest way to do it. So for my wife, I was sworn to secrecy. I could never tell anybody about her trauma, right? Because she says, well, it's a reflection on me and a reflection on my family. And so also the other thing is if she even tried to talk about it, she would just break down crying.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize the reason she was breaking down crying is because her mind was seeing it in real time, thinking she was being hurt now. And so that's the best way. So if you think about something when you were a child, and as you think about it, you have trouble talking about it, you get choked up, you start to cry, you start to shake, right? Or you feel those butterflies in your stomach, right? It's active. Yeah. It has to be resolved.
One of the things I see a lot when I'm working with super high achievers is they'll start to experience that and then they'll push it back down and try to outrun it.
Yes. Yep.
They'll try to get ahead of it. So it's almost like they're still using those neurochemicals to try to outpace the trauma. So what's going on when that's happening for them?
Well, that's what they've learned to do, is to cope. And so the whole thing is that our whole system currently is teaching people to live and manage and cope with it.
Yes.
You have anxiety? Well, let's teach you how to live with anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I always use the analogy. I said, if you went to your dentist with a toothache and they just put Novocaine in and they numbed it and said, do you feel the pain? You say, no. Well, here's a pamphlet on how to live with toothaches, right? You would just say, no, thanks. I'll go to another dentist. Take it out. Let's get it out of there. Yeah. And that's really what we're doing, is saying, let's get it out of there. We don't want you living with that pain. Yes. Right. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be happy about it. Yes. That we're not going to make it, oh, this is a great event that happened to me. No. But what we're looking for is to stop the distortion, where the mind is confusing the information with something that's happening and creating a dysregulation of your nervous system. It's not meant to do that, right? No animal could do that. No. It's only humans that can do it.
Right.
And so when people have learned to live and manage and cope with it, they can still perform. I mean, my wife, if you had met her, she didn't get into drugs or alcohol or anything like that, but she was living constantly in fear and seeing danger everywhere. Yeah. We could come out of a store and she would say, can you believe how rude that clerk was? And I'll go, I didn't think she was rude. What did she say that was rude? She says, what did you say the way she answered me when I asked her that question, or the way she stuffed the clothes in the bag? And I'm just like, I didn't see any of that.
Right. Totally unaware.
But that to her, right, was just like, how could I not see that?
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why she saw it. But now I totally understand. It was her mind was looking for danger, and it can find it, right, even in the subtlest ways. But that's going to affect your enjoyment of life.
Yeah. It's going to mute the colors of what's going on, even in your performance. And that's why I'm so excited to bring Dr. Woods on to the podcast for so many reasons. But, one of the biggest ones is here we are trying to do great and big things out in the world, trying to create things that create transformation in people's lives, or products and services and all these things. Yet we're carrying around this 10,000 pound backpack, and we're like limping, carrying the backpack and trying to continue to serve others instead of like taking the backpack off in 4 hours.
Right.
And being able to like stand up and see things differently than you can with that weight. And in full disclosure, I am going to be working with Dr. Wood, and I'm going to be documenting that journey. And so you can be seeing what's going on from the inside out, because the reality is we all have our things and we're all too close to our own things to see.
Exactly. Well. Yep.
And that's why
even your own kids.
Even your own kids. Yes, exactly. Yep. So we're going to be working with Dr. Woods with my kids, and as well as me. I've dealt with trauma in the past, and I knew when he was talking, just that visceral, even though I've covered it, I could, sense that visceral reaction when I think back, and I'm like, no, this has got to get cleared, because I've got a big vision and I want to help millions of entrepreneurs, and I am standing in my own way if I'm allowing the trauma to continue to stay there and fester, right, and take my energy.
Yep.
So
and that's why we call this a performance program,
yes,
not therapy.
yes,
Because the premise behind I start off with is that there's nothing wrong with anybody.
right.
Right. So the reason I was able to do and not be responding the way my wife was is because my life was a totally different experience.
Right.
I didn't have trauma. I had no trauma. So my nervous system as a child was constantly being regulated. It wasn't that things didn't happen once in a while. I get bumped,
Right.
but I could get back and regulate it so quickly and easily because there was nothing else interfering with it. And so when we do that for people, your performance goes up. So most people want to say, well, I'd rather go for a performance program than trauma therapy.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we worked with Marco Cicchetto. He's a fascinating, I think I told you his story. He's a runner from Kenya, a marathon runner. And he lost both his legs below the knee to frostbite from an accident. And so he had to learn how to walk again, and then he eventually learned how to run again and run in marathons. And so the people who make the prosthetics said to me, this is last year, about this time, they said that he's been training. We believe he's an Olympic hopeful, but he's plateaued. He's not improving no matter how much more training he's doing. Nothing seems to be getting him to that next level. He needs to improve if he wants to really make it. So Marco came in to see me. We went through the 4-hour program, and then 9 days later, he ran in a race and took 15 seconds per mile off his time. Now that's huge at that level because this guy's running at a pretty high level. Yeah. And so he gave us this great testimonial about how he said, I was so much more present. He said, I really felt present, because that was the key, is to stay present in the moment when you're running, focused on what you're doing. And so then a few weeks later, he ran in the Boston Marathon, same one that Rebecca went back to. Wow. And he broke the world record at the Boston Marathon for amputees. Wow. And then a couple months later, he ran the Chicago Marathon, broke his own world record by another 5 minutes, and got signed by Nike. So he's a Nike athlete. So that's what I love about what we're doing, is we're not treating anybody like they're broken or there's anything wrong with them, right? If your mind filters, I always talk about this, if I had a filter and I pour water through the filter, it's going to come out clear. Right. But if I pack mud in the filter and then I pour the water through it, the water's going to come out muddy. Right. So we'd look at that and say, what's wrong with the water? There's nothing wrong with the water. It just filtered through the mud. So what we're going to do is clean out the filter so that your mind can filter right through your highlights and experiences and goals and targets, as opposed to, right, what's happened to you, because it will always default to survival first.
Always.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if there's survival threats, your mind's going to first go to fix those before it's going to be focusing on what is in your best interest, right, and performance.
And it makes such sense, because this is why our brains are wired so beautifully. Once you learn to tap into the system that's created there, it's working optimally. We have a naturally bent negativity bias, so we're naturally going to see 9 times more negative than we will what's truth.
Right.
That's the monkey part of our brain, for lack of a better scientific term. And that allows us to survive, not getting eaten by tigers and all of those things. But if you add the trauma on top of that, now this negativity bias is looking for everything that could possibly create that scenario once again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but animals can't do that because they don't store all this detail about these events and experiences.
Wow.
So a zebra cannot feel fear of a lion unless there's a lion present. Zebras can't remember lions. Zebras can't imagine a lion. But if a lion shows up, the zebra's nervous system will activate.
Right.
Perfectly designed system. That's the same system that we have. Like you were saying, 95% of our mind works just like that.
Yeah.
But we have 2 unique features, right? And one of them being memory. And then where we store tremendous amounts of detail about events and experiences. And the mind continues to use that as a resource, which is then taking it on, like you said, the negative bias.
Yeah.
because it wants to defend you and protect you. So I never believe in the word sabotage. I don't believe the mind would ever sabotage itself. It's trying to avoid pain or danger.
Yep. Yep.
And so if you work with all these entrepreneurs, right? And so, you see all the time where they'll say, oh, I sabotage myself, but they're not really. The mind's trying to avoid them being hurt, right? Or avoid some sort of pain.
Yep. Avoid being found out as lacking, right? That's the biggest threat. So we're not going to spend a 4-hour session. He and I are, but not on the podcast. But I'll certainly document that for you. But I'd love for you to kind of break down, like, what is the overarching process that you take people through to start to shift, to clean the filter, so to speak, and shift this trauma out of the current status into the past?
We really begin to start off with a lot of education on how our minds work.
Okay.
Because I really believe that's important. Once you understand what's going on, it's a lot easier to come up with a solution.
Yes.
So, when we typically, go to see a doctor, it's so complicated that they just basically just do their work. Right? Oh, you got a heart problem. Okay, well, let us just do this, and this, and we're going to fix your heart problem. You really don't understand how the heart's working. Right? So you just trust, that they're going to do the right thing.
Yep.
Right? And so they're smart guys, they're women. But with this, the idea is to be able to get the mind, or get you to understand why you've been experiencing these things. There's nothing wrong with you. I met a lady who was at a conference one time, and the speaker was up talking, and she periodically just start crying.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
And I said, I noticed you're crying a lot. She goes, yeah, I'm just a very emotional person. And I said, well, the purpose of an emotion is for an action. So your mind's trying to get you to do something. And so I said, how would you like to clear that up? And she said, well, how do I do that? Right? And I said, your mind's filtering through a whole bunch of stuff that's happened. I said, I'm assuming that you've had a traumatic life. She goes, oh, you have no idea. I said, well, no, I probably do. Right?
I probably do.
Yeah. That's why you're experiencing these emotions. So the education is the first. We spend about an hour and a half on that. And then we start working on getting your mind, right, and to feel in a very, very relaxed alpha brainwave state.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get you into an alpha brainwave state, then we're going to start looking at 2 or 3 experiences you've had in your life that have been traumatic or disturbing. And then we'll work on, I take you through a series of techniques, and it's basically very quick. As you remember at the event, we're looking at a 2-3 minute highlight reel. That's about it. And we can get the mind to update that event. Once we update 2 or 3 events, the mind then has the process down, and then it'll start to apply it. And so once we've got that process started, your mind will start, just as like if you come in with a broken leg, we reset the leg. We don't have to do anything else. It's just going to heal itself. The same is true with trauma. Is that once you've got that process of healing trauma started, it will clear pretty much all the trauma. Very rarely do I have somebody who will come back and say something else popped up, but it may have been unrelated. So it could have been down at the bottom and now it pops up to the top because everything else is cleared.
Yeah.
But once you understand.
It's clear, right?
Yeah. And then once we finish that, we've got that reset. Then we start saying, okay, tell us about your goals. Tell us about some of your highlights in your life. And we want your mind now using those as its resource.
Mm.
And then that totally changes the filtering process. And then you start focusing more on goals and targets, using your highlights and experiences, get you back to center.
Yeah.
In the present. And that's life-changing. It was interesting, one thing that you said earlier is talking about how people will say afterwards, everything looks brighter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really because so much energy was being used on the mind filtering through all this guck, right? Taking it out of being present. When that energy frees up, now you've got more energy. So you're actually taking in more information, but it's brighter.
Yeah. Do you
and then we give you a series of audios. So the idea is once we work on the explicit memory, all that detail, then we work on procedural memory, which are the habits or behaviors, what I call codes.
Right.
Because your mind codes on how to adapt to its environment. So it'll build a code for you or a habit or behavior. So if you want to start changing those, right, that's dealing with the basal ganglia, which learns slowly.
Yes.
So we've got to slowly allow that part of the brain to start adapting, because it won't change instantly.
Right.
But if you want to change a habit, then you've got to repeat a new way, and it just builds a new code for you.
Yeah. Do you find physical changes with people once they go through this process with you? Do you see an up level in energy and some of the, like, I know with your daughter, she, with Crohn's disease, you wouldn't think that would be something that would get completely cleared with trauma. So I'd love for you to talk about how once you work with them through this, what kind of transformations have you seen from a physical standpoint on the other side?
Well, Marco was a great example. How all of a sudden can he run faster, right? It's because the energy increased. So the ATP, the energy in the cell, is freed up.
Yeah.
So when we're in a traumatic situation, we have a lot of trauma, then the response to trauma is inflammation.
Right.
Inflammation is basically the cells going into a cell danger response. So in a cell danger response, they basically protect anything from getting in the cell. So nothing's getting in, but nothing's getting out.
Yeah.
So for my daughter, that showed up in her lower intestinal area. So that was her Crohn's.
Yeah.
And so nothing is getting in those cells, nothing's getting out. But the cell danger response is a temporary measure to protect the system. And when the danger is past, then the inflammation starts to come down, the immune system comes back online and starts cleaning up.
Yeah.
But that couldn't happen as long as the trauma was looping. As soon as we stopped the trauma looping, the inflammation came down, right? There it's gone. And so what is Crohn's? Crohn's is inflammation.
Right.
And so a lot of the people who are dealing with, inflammation now, we're understanding what happens with inflammation. That's affecting our ability to heal. Right. They're affecting our ability to perform. So that's what we see, is just a change in the way you feel, the way you heal, and the way you perform. Right. And we've got all kinds of documentation of people who have just seen life-changing results.
Wow. What's one of your favorite stories about a transformation that is somebody like us that's kind of gone through working with you and has processed through and come out on the other side with just a different version of themselves, maybe a bigger version of themselves than they realized?
A great one. There's a couple of, from a trauma standpoint, I worked with a U.S. Army sniper. This was the most dramatic. He had to shoot and kill a 12-year-old boy. Oh. And when I sat down with him, he just was sobbing. He said, I can't talk about this anymore. He said, I got arrested at the VA last week because I was throwing tables and chairs. They kept asking me to talk about it. And so what I said to him is, we're not going to ask you to talk about it. I said, I'm going to be basically looking for a 2 to 3 minute. We can just do it visually. You don't even have to talk about it. Oh. And by the time I was finished, he could describe in complete detail everything that happened that day, including shooting the boy. Oh. And he said to me, he goes, how the bleep did you do that? And I said, I didn't do anything. Your mind for 8 years has been trying to get you not to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Because that would stop the problem. But you couldn't not pull the trigger. So your mind now understands that that's over. So it stops calling for the action. There's no action required.
Right.
And then on a business standpoint, with working with entrepreneurs, because I know you love doing that so much, right?
Yeah.
I worked with one guy, you'll see his testimonial, Joel. So when Joel came in to see me, and this is about 4 years ago, I guess he went through the program. He had these great ideas on the health and wellness and some of the stuff he wanted to do, but he just wasn't getting it off the ground. And what it came down to was, when he was a child growing up, his parents were very, very conservative. So they were always telling him, to be successful, you get a job, you buy a house, you get a pension, right? You retire.
Yeah.
So he was an entrepreneur. And so what was happening is that every time he would get close to any kind of risk, his mind would try to protect him and work around or come up with it. So he changed his business plan.
Oh, wow.
Right? I'll do it this way, and that way I don't have to take any risk. Maybe I can partner. Maybe I can get some equipment, lent to me. I don't have to put out the capital. I mean, whatever that was.
Right.
And he didn't realize that's what he was doing. But once he got that reset done, that, as all the entrepreneurs you work with, and you know as well, is that risk is part of being an entrepreneur. That's why not many people do it very well, because they do what Joel was doing, was trying to avoid the risk. You got to run right into it.
Yep.
Once he did that, he did $1 million of business next year after going through it. Now he's doing about $4 million in business.
Yeah.
All because his mind was trying to protect him, not sabotage him.
Yeah.
And we got just so many just like that.
Yeah.
A young girl, 16-year-old girl, she went through the program. She's not a marathon, she's a cross-country, long-distance runner.
Okay.
And her mom came and said, she actually passed out on 2 of her races right near the finish line.
Oh, my goodness.
And so what it was coming down to is that she was so nervous before she went into the races that she couldn't eat. So she'd get up early in the morning and she'd say, no, I can't eat. I'm just going to run. So she had nothing. By the time she got to the end of the race, she had no power.
Wow.
So she was literally passing out. And so what we did is took her through the program, got all that calmed down, got her to at least be able to take one of those protein shakes, right? And so then she started at least getting some nutrition in. And then as her system became calmer, she was able to take care of herself better. She ended up breaking all her school records. She placed 7th in the state. She's getting offered scholarships from some of the top Ivy League universities, but she would have just dropped out because she would have said, I just can't seem to run. I just don't have the power. I don't have the energy. I don't have the focus.
Wow.
And so calming all that down gave her now the ability to focus and stay present. And, there's just so many, cases like that. And again, I love athletes. I love seeing athletes and what they can do because it's so easy to measure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun working with athletes. That is something that I miss, that immediate gratification.
I don't know if I told you about the one, Rob Killian with the Spartan leadership.
No, tell my listeners that
was
an amazing story.
So fascinating. So Rob Killian is a, supreme athlete. He's a Green Beret Special Forces guy, runs in all these, grueling races, where they've got 15, 16 miles of obstacles to go through, running up mountains. And so he's obviously in great shape. He's a Green Beret Special Forces guy, but he hadn't won in 3 years. And so when I was asked to speak at the Spartan Leadership at the World Championships in Lake Tahoe, the lady who runs Spartan Japan said to me, I'd love for you to help me with Rob. Like, Rob is running in the World Championships on Sunday. She says, he's such a great guy. She says, just even from the trauma from him as a Special Forces guy, I think that you could help him. She says, now there's a guy running in these races that's unbeatable. Everybody says this guy's winning everything. She says, but I think Rob's got the potential, right, to do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I sat down with Rob on the Friday. We went through and he shared one of his traumas, and he shares this, so I'm okay to share it with you. Is he said when he was running in one of the races, he picked up one of those 50-pound sandbags that they strap over their shoulders to run with.
Okay.
He didn't realize that it had a hole in it. So as he was running, some of the sand was coming out, which is on its own okay. I mean, there's nothing he can do. And so, but one of the other runners posted all over the internet that he was a cheater. He picked up a bag with a hole in it. So you can imagine the integrity of a guy like this, right? How that was affecting when he was running his race. In his mind, he's thinking about, what are people thinking about me? Are they thinking I'm cheating? I want to go out of my way to prove I'm not cheating. That's taking away his focus and energy.
Yeah.
And so taking away that cellular energy, that ATP. So on Friday, I worked with Rob. He ran in the World Championships, and he beat that guy by a minute, won the world. He's the world champ for Spartan. And beat the guy by a minute who was supposed to be unbeatable. That had nothing to do with training. That had to do with his mind.
Yeah.
Right. And so that ability was that ability was always within him. He was already that athlete. There was just something interfering with him getting to that next gear, that next level. Yeah. And it's the same thing for all these people that, you're working with. They have another gear. How do you get that gear?
Yeah. Yeah, it just aligns so much with what my tribe hears all the time. You know, you really do have everything you need inside you right now.
Yep.
You just have to learn how to order it and tap into it. I would love for you to share, as we're wrapping up here, a little bit about what's in the future for you, what's coming, how people can get connected with you. I know my listeners listening right now are going to be like, get me in that program, and they'll be following, and we'll put all the links to that in the show notes. Of course, they'll be following me along as I go to Florida and get strapped up to the telemetry machine and learn a little bit about what's going on. But I'd love for you to just talk about what's the Institute up to now, what are you up to now, and just really how can people connect with the work that you're doing?
Awesome. Yeah. So we have 3 different ways of doing the program. One is a one-on-one with me where people fly to Florida, right? Or I end up being somewhere that I can do it. And if you come to Florida, then we have our hyperbaric chamber, we have our theta chamber, we have our AO scan. With this AO scan, we can scan your entire body in literally 10 minutes, and it comes up with a full report on whether you're out of balance or in balance with either vitamins, nutrients, or whatever it is. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it's all done through frequencies by seeing whether a frequency is too high or too low or in balance. And then the hyperbaric is the thing that we use for my son to really help him with his head injuries.
Yeah.
And then the theta chamber is really cool because it puts you into a theta brainwave state, which is so relaxing.
Yeah.
And the key is what we're really doing through our program is teaching you to be able to stay in that very relaxed, focused alpha brainwave state,
right,
which is a state they believe Albert Einstein lived in. And so he was very focused, but super relaxed.
Yeah.
That's where we perform at our best.
Yes.
And so we have the one-on-ones. We also have an online program. And I think we're offering your tribe a discount. So I think that'll be in the notes that you'll hear from Dr. Shannon. And then we also do groups where I'll come out and do a group, which is where we first met at Shanda's.
Yep.
Right. So I think we had like 140 people at that.
Yeah. 140 in that room. And then in James Mastermind was like 30 of us. Yeah.
Yep. So that's another way to do it. And then we're also now doing more and more measurements. So we're doing a cortisol. We got a cortisol test that we're using.
Oh, cool.
So what we can do is we can show from the first day until 30 days later, the difference of what happens after you start the program. And then in 30 days after listening to the audios, we can actually physically change your body. And when that happens, right, we start to heal.
Yeah.
Because the mind, I always talk about it, is if the mind is in a fight or flight state, it's not doing maintenance. So it's doing minimal maintenance.
Yeah.
When we get all that cleared up, then it starts working on maintenance. So I've been healthy all my life, right? But the reason I've been healthy is because I've never had any trauma. And so the bumps and bruises I've had along the way, I've been able to heal very quickly.
Yeah.
And I never understood why I always healed quickly when I was a kid. I mean, I played hockey with 6 concussions and 60 stitches.
Wow.
In my head, and I never missed a hockey game. Now, today, they wouldn't probably let me play with some of those concussions. But at the same time, back then, it was like, yeah, go ahead. You can keep playing.
Just do it.
That's right. And so those are the things that we're doing, just expanding it out. We're going to be developing new programs, another one called Now, which is neuro optimization for weight and wellness using the mind, right, to get you into your optimal weight, right? Not everybody wants to be a super skinny model, right? Maybe you just want to lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds or feel healthier. So the idea is let's use your brain to be able to get you there.
Yeah.
And then we have a whole line of nutrients and supplements as well.
I love it. And so we will link to all things Dr. Woods down here in the notes. Obviously, the two of us share this passion, this desire to see you transform from the inside out using this beautiful, beautiful gift that God gave you, your brain, to actually optimize the way that you're meant to optimize and perform the way that you were meant in your calling that you have out in the world, and really be able to work at that high level with that ease, with that focused state that you were just talking about, that I think all of us crave but have not experienced. And so I am so just really honored to witness your work, to participate with your work. We've decided that we're going to fly out to Florida for it instead of trying to do it virtually. So, although I know you do that as well. And we'll be sharing that with the tribe as we go, as we go through it. But I would love just a parting thought for those who are ready to dive into the world of training in this way. What is your one thought to leave them with as we sign off today?
Well, I mean, obviously, anybody who's working with you are really very lucky. I mean, you're a tremendous practitioner. That's why I love, doing this here today and connecting again with you, for the last, when we meet last year again,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but here's the great news is statistically, businesses, startup businesses or small businesses trying to grow are actually doing a lot better now. The failure rate is a lot less.
Mm.
And so you'll hear all this pessimistic, the odds of success on small, growing businesses. But I believe that the reason that's happening are because of working with people like you.
Yeah.
Right? So there's so much more out there for people. I mean, how great it is that, they can meet with you and go through your training, and then you bring in someone like me who adds another element to it, right? That's why the success rate of small businesses has grown dramatically in the last 15 years because this information is available. So people who are going through your program, it's brilliant. It's very, very smart. And that's one of the things I talk about in my book, is that successful people aren't afraid to ask for help.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And knowing that it isn't more effort, it's using the gift that's been given to you the way it was intended to work to begin with, to clean the filter. Don is the best at painting pictures, clean that filter. The water that's running in there is just fine. And, and it's waiting to be optimized the way it's supposed to. Don, thank you so much for your brilliance, for all the work that you're doing in the world. And it'll be fun to continue on this conquest to helping people live from the inside out.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Shannon. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Bye for now.